has been in touch on Twitter. He says, as regards the BBC One Extra station platforming a murderer, and that is exactly what they have done twice on at least 2 occasions, they are plain wrong. Sackings must occur, says Les. Have you ever read the scripts to rapper song scripts in general? They're really, really violent, full of shootings, sexual abuse. I never cared for rap even years ago. It sucks. Well, this is even worse. This is drill, which is a sort of subset of that. And Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, is in The Sun tomorrow. He says, I can think of few more sickening things than glorifying the death of an innocent young boy in songs to make money. This is our national broadcaster promoting this music from a murderer. Well, Robbie Moore is the MP for the Conservative Party for Keighley and Ilkley. Robbie, we'll talk about gangs in just a second, but just briefly, your reaction to this story that so many of our viewers and listeners are really concerned about. This is our national broadcaster, the BBC, playing songs about murder by a murderer, and licence fee payers are paying for it.
Well, this is just absolutely outrageous, and Robert Jenrick was quite right to use the robust language that you've referred to there. I know that there's going to be an article about this in The Sun tomorrow, but, you know, this is our national broadcaster who need to be held to account when they are playing music repeatedly, as it seems to have been, on their platform. And the comments that your viewers have made, I endorse a lot of them. I think that it is completely inappropriate, and the BBC need to be held to account on their actions that they've carried out in playing this music.
Robbie, thank you for that. I know that you've campaigned, and the main reason we have you on the programme is to talk about inquiries into these gangs, the grooming gangs, paedophile gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them. I know you've campaigned for that for some time. Is this U-turn, and it is a U-turn, by Yvette Cooper, is that enough? Is that going to get to the bottom of that? Is that going to help solve the problem?
Let's be clear, this isn't really a U-turn from the Home Secretary. What we've seen, and I've just come from the House of Commons chamber, quite rightly, the Home Secretary has announced that the government will be implementing all of the 20 recommendations from the ICSA report that was carried out by Professor Alexis Jay. A very good move, something that I fully endorse. But that's where it really stops, because what the Home Secretary is not putting in place is a national inquiry that specifically looks at rape gangs.
Let's talk about that in just a second, Robbie, but the point you make about Professor Alexis Jay, on that report, your party said it only accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations, and it also, when the Conservatives were in government, sat on a shelf for 18 months with nothing happening.
Well, I have been talking about this issue since getting elected in 2019. It's something that many of my constituents have unfortunately had to endure, this heinous crime for far too long. It's been going on for decades, which is why...
Did your party fail to resolve it?
But I've also called out the failure of the British state, regardless of political party, for not getting on top of this issue for far too long, whether that's been national government or indeed local government, or indeed anyone with safeguarding responsibilities, which is why I was hoping that we would see the Home Secretary today do a U-turn and actually implement a national inquiry that specifically focuses on gang-related grooming that is taking place in far too many of our towns across the UK, indeed like Keighley and the Bradford district.
Why is a national inquiry needed? What's wrong with local inquiries? I spoke to Tom Crowther, KC, previously, who did the Telford inquiry. He's going to advise the government on this, on what to do, because the Telford inquiry was largely seen to have helped in some way. Should local inquiries and what was actually being called for by Oldham councillors, surely that is some way forward in this?
Yeah, absolutely, some way forward. But we want to have full robustness, full openness, full transparency across all of those towns. And you put yourself in my position, where we have a local authority who has consistently refused to have an inquiry into child sexual exploitation. Indeed, our West Yorkshire Mayor and her Deputy Mayor for Policing has said that this is not a Bradford problem, this is a national problem. So when you have a local authority that does not want to have that spotlight that shone across its area, and then the government is not willing to step in taking those tough decisions, their areas like Bradford will unfortunately not have that level of scrutiny, despite concerns being raised. And the second point being here is, yeah, I welcome the fact that the Home Secretary is talking about this. But what she has implemented today through a pilot scheme being looked at across 5 towns is not statutory binding. It does not compel witnesses to come forward and give evidence. Only £5 million has been allocated to this, which is nowhere near enough to provide the scrutiny that is needed. It will not lead to convictions. And indeed, that is where my concern lies, because in essence, unless you have the robustness of the state kicking in, you will not have the convictions that follow. And indeed, the trust that needs to be installed between those victims, survivors, and those families that have had to endure these crimes for far, far too long. And that trust back in the British state will not happen. And that's why I think that the Home Secretary's announcement today fell way, way short of any expectation that I, or indeed many of those victims, were expecting.
Robbie, what is happening today in Bradford? What is actually happening that you know about, that you've been told by constituents about, that needs to be investigated? Are we still in a situation where there are people in authority turning a blind eye to this?
Well, absolutely, and that absolutely, in my view, we have historic cases that are working their way through the system. We've seen some be convicted, which is very good news to hear. But there is historic cases that are working their way through the system that haven't got to the courts yet. There are live cases that are working their way through the system that West Yorkshire Police are dealing with. Other cases that have been explored elsewhere have referred to, unfortunately, young children being trafficked through the Bradford district. But yet, at a national level, there has been no spotlight that has been shone.
And that's my concern, Robbie, because you can have a local inquiry, but actually are the dots joined? Because this, to me, in regard to the rape of children, this is county lines all over again.
And that's exactly why I really do hope and plea to not only the Home Secretary, but the Prime Minister, indeed anybody that is in a position of responsibility, to just get behind the calls of openness and transparency and actually ensuring that proper justice is put in place for those victims, and that there is no cover-up or fear of cover-up in any of these gang-related or child sexual exploitation cases, which is why I do think that I welcome the recommendations from the ICSA report being put in place, but it just does not go far enough. And that is why I, and indeed others like Sarah Champion, the MP for Rotherham, have been advocating for that national focus, so that those dots can be joined and deal with those complexities that exist across towns and have haunted communities like mine in Keighley and the wider Bradford district for far too long.
Robbie, let's keep talking about this as an issue that's not going to go away. We will certainly monitor what happens very closely, hopefully with your help.